Hi, Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Tuesday, May the 23rd, 2023. This week we'll be focusing on our reading from Romans from this past Sunday, Romans 6, 1 through 14. In my sermon on Sunday, I focused primarily on the first couple of verses where Paul asks, what are we to say? Should we continue in sin so that grace may abound? By no means. How can we who died to sin go on living in it? And then in verses 3 through 6, he says this: Do you not know that all of us who've been baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? Therefore we have been buried with him by baptism into death, so that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life. For if we've been united with him in a death like his, we will certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his. We know that our old self was crucified with him so that the body of sin might be destroyed and we might no longer be enslaved to sin. Obviously, across the greater Christian church, there are various ways of looking at baptism and doing baptism. So I don't know, maybe we'll get into a little bit of that this week, but it's a significant moment. Baptism is how we are welcomed into God's family, into the church. It marks, a transition and opens up a door of a new way of living. I love the story of after the baptism of his baby brother in church, a little boy sobbed on the way home in the back seat, and his dad asked him several times without any response. And finally, the boy replied, "The pastor said that he wanted us brought up in a Christian home, but I want to stay with you guys." Maybe there's more truth to that than we're willing to admit sometimes. I also like the story, and I've told it before, but when the gospel was first preached on the island of Barbados, several individuals accepted the invitation to be baptized. And when they arrived at the water for the baptismal service, obviously baptism by immersion, the women, however, were dressed in nightgowns and the men in striped pajamas. And the missionaries were a little confused, and they were afraid that they might have been misunderstood as they were trying to explain baptism. And they urged the candidates to change their clothes, but they refused. And so finally the missionaries allowed it, albeit reluctantly, and decided to be sure that this didn't happen the next time. But however, before the next baptismal service, the missionaries attended a funeral, and they noticed that the corpse was dressed in pajamas. And when they inquired about it, it was explained, "We believe that when a person dies, he goes to sleep. And so we're buried in our sleepwear." And only then did the missionaries understand. The baptism had been explained to them as a burial, and so, logically, the candidates wore their burial clothes to be baptized. Also, a cute story I heard once about a red-headed woman who was being baptized, very, very decked out, very, beautiful red hair, nails and eyelashes, and so forth. And she, again, in a church that does, immersion. And so she wore the white robe and went into the baptistry. And as she came up out of the water, the pastor noticed that something was floating next to him, which was a bit of a surprise. And it seemed to be moving. And so he looked at her and he realized that she had lost her beautiful red wig and one eyelash as well. And the congregation began to chuckle a little bit. And from that point on, the pastor learned to do a little more counseling before he baptized anyone again. But in a sense, Paul's talking about the old self being crucified, dying to the old self. And again, maybe there was a little bit more in that than at first glance. And finally, the story is told of a grandmother who was going to be baptized, and the whole family, of course, was there to watch. And they had tried to tell the 6-year-old grandson what was happening, how grandma was dying to sin and being baptized into Christ. And so as they waited for this to take place, the 6-year-old looked around and he whispered to his dad, "Daddy, how are they ever going to get Meemaw up on that cross?" And of course, as Timothy Smith reminds us, the great news is that we don't have to go to the cross. Thanks be to God. Jesus did that for us. But there is a sense in which when we were baptized, we did go to the cross with him. As Paul says in Romans 6, we were buried with him through baptism. For we know that our old self was crucified with him so that we might no longer be slaves to sin. All right, we're going to talk more about baptism, more about this this passage in Romans 6 in the days to come. Hope you have a great day today. We'll see you again tomorrow. Bye.